Welcome to the DelDOT training series on ADA compliance. This video will introduce the following learning objectives: understanding the importance of accessibility, how the rules of the road for pedestrians factor into accessibility, DelDOT's obligations under state and federal law to construct and maintain accessible pedestrian facilities, and the purpose of the DelDOT Pass Manual. To understand the importance of accessibility, we acknowledge that walking is central to who we are as human beings. We are born to walk and explore. Walking is our natural condition and has been for as long as we've existed. It is fundamental to our existence and our primary mode of transportation. For most of our human existence, we were free to roam the world as we pleased, unrestricted by laws and property boundaries. And then civilization happened. And civilization required rules for people to live in harmony. Rules that created private property boundaries and barriers to limit others' access. Private property only remains private when boundaries are enforced, or the public may claim a right to cross that land again. This is why people go to great lengths to enforce their property boundaries. A locked gate prevents public access to private land. Allowing public use of a path across private property may legally establish a public use right called a prescriptive easement. Today, the lands that people may lawfully walk are their own private property and public lands like state and federal parks, forests, and preserves, and in those cases, typically only by paying an entrance fee, which is a limited use license. The land below mean high tide is another place people may roam freely. It is preserved for public use and regulated for conservation and safety under Delaware's conservation laws in Title VII of the Delaware Code. Other places people may lawfully walk are public roadways. The Delaware Code provides that where a sidewalk is not available, any pedestrian walking along and upon a highway shall walk facing traffic only on a shoulder, as far as practicable from the edge of the roadway. DelDOT design, construction, and maintenance staff should be aware that people have the legal right to walk along public roadways. Prohibiting that right requires compelling safety reasons and specific treatments installed to notify and direct them to safer locations. In Delaware and across the United States, the space adjacent to our roadways is the only place people may roam or even exist, for instance, should they be experiencing homelessness. Some roadways are designed to accommodate pedestrians in ways that foster welcoming, accessible, and socially active places. While urban place design is an important and related topic to accessibility, there is no federal or state law requiring DelDOT to provide or design high-functioning urban spaces like this. This series of ADA training videos focuses on DelDOT's legal obligation to make the sidewalks it has accessible to and usable by persons with disabilities. The sidewalks that line our state's roads are typically narrow and tight to the street. They are provided this way in an attempt to accommodate all modes of travel in the very limited public space available. Use of that public space is allocated by state law. In fact, it is unlawful for any pedestrian to walk along and upon an adjacent roadway where a sidewalk is provided and is accessible. Dancing on the sidewalk, however, is still perfectly legal. The law only prohibits walking or standing in the roadway. When crossing a road, pedestrians must cross at intersections. Vehicles must yield the right-of-way to pedestrians in marked crosswalks. Pedestrians must yield the right-of-way in unmarked crosswalks. And no mid-block or diagonal crossing is lawful unless pedestrian traffic control devices have been provided for that purpose. Disobeying these rules of the road can result in fines and carry certain liability risks for drivers and pedestrians. The pedestrian infractions captured in this image include not crossing at the adjacent intersection with traffic control signals, not obeying the traffic control devices, walking into the path of oncoming traffic, not yielding the right-of-way outside of a marked crosswalk. Compliance with the rules of the road by all users encourages safe accommodation of the many modes of travel such as cars and trucks, buses, bicycles, and pedestrians. DelDOT's obligations under state law to provide pedestrian facilities on its roadways are found in Title 17, Section 132F of the Delaware Code. That section of the code requires DelDOT to construct sidewalks in urban areas based on roadway classification, project type, and need. DelDOT must also provide signs and markings in accordance with the Delaware MUTCD. Signs and markings are the tools used to implement the rules of the road. For more information on these rules, see Title 21 of the Delaware Code. DelDOT is required under federal law to make the pedestrian facilities it has accessible to and usable by persons with disabilities. They must also be maintained to remain accessible throughout their service life. Federal accessibility laws are intended to provide equitable access to essential government services. Sidewalks are an essential government service because they afford mobility that enables people to pursue the things that are essential to life, like jobs, education, healthcare, and groceries. Since sidewalks are an essential government service, they must be provided equitably. That means they must be accessible to all types of users, free of barriers and obstructions that would otherwise prevent some people from using them, such as barriers that would cause some users to leave the relative safety of the sidewalk to find a more traversable path, and barriers that prevent people from traveling between the street level and the sidewalk level. The U.S. Congress and federal courts have found that denying some people equal access to government services is unjust and a violation of their civil rights. Laws were put in place to correct this inequity. They include the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Federal Rehabilitation Act, and the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 28, Part 35. These laws are intended to make our sidewalks accessible to everyone. Accessibility starts with proper planning, design, and construction, but it doesn't end there. Once built, pedestrian accessible routes must be maintained, remain accessible throughout the year, and over the entire life of the facility. DelDOT's obligation under state and federal law is to make pedestrian infrastructure accessible when and where it is provided. From a safety standpoint, good planning and design practices call for separating vulnerable users like pedestrians from other modes of travel through the use of sidewalks and crosswalks. Accessible pedestrian facilities must be constructed where pedestrians may legally walk and pedestrian demand exists or can reasonably be anticipated to exist, and the pedestrian use conforms to the rules of the road, and the project scope triggers obligations to provide accessible pedestrian facilities under state and federal law. The relationship between project scope and the legal obligation to provide accessible pedestrian facilities will be covered in more detail in the next video. Additional videos in this training series will briefly cover how to address these precautions for designers, such as the public has the right of pedestrian use along the edge of all roadways and all intersections unless it is specifically prohibited in law, such as on interstate highways. Limiting those rights requires compelling safety reasons, inclusion of design features to delineate and guide people to safer pedestrian facilities should be considered. Consult DelDOT's Pedestrian Accessibility Standards for Facilities in the Public Right-of-Way Pass Manual for design standards. Consult with DelDOT's Title II Coordinator for additional guidance when necessary. More detailed information is contained in the DelDOT Pedestrian Accessibility Standards Manual for Facilities in the Public Right-of-Way or Pass Manual. The Pass Manual consolidates the various state and federal requirements for accessibility into one manual, applies only to DelDOT projects within the state rights-of-way, but should be made a condition of permit approval for others doing work within the state rights-of-way, such as developers and utility companies. The DelDOT Pass Manual should be used as your primary source for accessibility requirements on Delaware's roadways. Additional videos in this series will provide an overview of important accessibility considerations when planning, designing, and constructing pedestrian facilities, including how project type and scope affect what accessibility features must be included in the project, design requirements for pedestrian connections, crosswalks, sidewalks, and shared use pathways. There's a video covering the inspection process for construction acceptance for accessibility, and finally a video covering the request for practical exception process. We hope you found this video helpful in introducing the importance of accessibility, how the rules of the road for pedestrians factor into accessibility, DelDOT's obligations under state and federal law to construct and maintain accessible pedestrian facilities, and the purpose of the DelDOT Pass Manual. Please consult with DelDOT's ADA Title II Coordinator for additional accessibility guidance.